So I don't know why they really invited me, because I don't have a story. I've had great vacations. I've had health issues I've pushed through. I've lost loved ones, and I'm sure that's true with everybody. I've been in the same job for 27 years. I've been married to the same man for 38 years. And I have a bird feeder with a camera. That's where we're at. So I leave the storytelling to other people. I love this. I love the moth. I've been to a story slam. I love hearing how other people go through life. It's like being a voyeur in their lives. So the stories that I'm into right now are about my family. My daughter Hannah caught the genealogy bug, and not just your average Ancestry.com bug, but the I want to know what your relatives were like and how they lived bug. Well, I love that, because I'd walked away and tucked that away when I got married and had kids. So I was super excited, and I followed her into that rabbit hole happily. And as she went through the hundreds of photos, she came upon a book that my grandmother had written, Tippy, my grandmother Tippy, and the book was called Lest We Forget. And I had forgotten. And it was mostly because of how she described me in the book. She said I was blonde-headed and smart, shy, and I didn't use four-letter words, and all that was great. But she had to go on to say, and she wasn't happy about a few pounds of extra weight. And that box, it got boxed up. Hated that. So as she was going through these photos, she unearthed the book. And I knew that I needed to make peace with the book. I was 60. And I had to make peace with Tippy about what she wrote about me in the book. So the book is 200 typed pages about 94 people in our family, from coming over to the New World to my sister and I in the 80s. So I was excited, she was excited. It was just truly a gift to be able to take a look back at that. Now, my grandparents lived in a small town in West Virginia called Petersburg. It's about 2.5, 3 hours west of here, small town. My grandmother was a hairdresser. She owned Tippy's Beauty Salon, which was a pink Airstream trailer that was planted in the ground by the creek. And when I got a chance to go there, the salon was buzzing. The women were cackling, so much laughter. The noise of the hair dryers was overwhelming, and nobody seemed to smell the toxic hair dye. I also knew that my grandmother made a lot of candy. At the holidays, she would make 3 kinds of fudge and every kind of chocolate-covered cluster you could ever want. And all this goodness lived on the back porch, which was not heated. So this heaven of the back porch was cold, and just the place everybody wanted to be. I also knew my grandmother had a firm grip. I was there for a week, and I had been outside playing. I was starving, and I could smell dinner coming from the kitchen. And I went in, and I said, I cannot wait for that fried chicken. And she said, honey, that's not fried chicken, that's groundhog. And the next thing I knew, my little hand was in her little grip as we marched down Main Street to the Monarch grocery store to get me something else to eat. Now, here's what I heard tell about Tippy. Tippy did all the hair for all of the people who had died for the funeral home to get them ready for their viewing. I also heard tell that every couple of Sundays, Tippy would go missing. And she would be meeting up with the cobbler, who was a very proud man. And they would go to the pink trailer, they would go to the shop. And she would close the doors, and Tippy would pull the blinds down, and she would dye that man's hair black in secret. So she was a whirlwind. She was busy. There are people who may have possibly thought she was a busybody. And a busybody writes great books. So the book, 94 individual stories, 200 pages. Now, Hannah and I started to read the book. Hannah probably went first. And Tippy doesn't mince words in the book. She tells it like she sees it. And there were days and days where we would just howl over how Tippy described other people. She described men who were boozers and unemployed, a man who hid in the woods while his wife hoed the corn. She would talk about women who rubbed snuff. She talked about a woman who wore very nice floral dresses that must have been homemade because of how large she was above the waist. So, and she told us, she wrote in the book about her sister. And she even said about her sister that her sister, sadly, had been given the god-awful name of Gotha. So she also talked in the book and told stories about things that the family had no idea about. She talked about women in the 60s who had breast cancer and had mastectomies. She talked about people in our family who had killed themselves. And those were things that people did not share about their families. No family wanted everyone to know that those things were happening behind the scenes. So I got really curious as I read all this about the amount of labor it would have taken for her to write this book. She never left Petersburg. She wrote about these 94 people based on newspaper archives, the courthouse records, interviews that she did with people, and she would write letters to places like the New England Genealogical Society to get ship manifests. All of this would take us 10 minutes. It took her years. And when I was trying to figure out why did she write this book, it says in there that she wanted to chronicle the survival, love, and caring of our family. And she really wanted it not to be forgotten. So Tippy wrote a little bit about herself in the book. And actually, she wrote 7 pages about herself. If you do the math, 94 people, 200 pages, and there were 70 about Tippy. Tippy wrote in tidbits. She had tidbits and memories that she would document. She said she liked to cook, and she made fudge and candy at the holidays, and she made great soup beans. And look there was her recipe for soup beans right in the book. She was ahead of her time, and she thought that women should have control of their own bodies, be able to borrow money, and be able to own homes. She wrote in the book that when she went to see me at the hospital for the first time, she was wearing pedal pushers, and she felt very uncomfortable because that was not something that was worn by women at the time. She also rated herself as a mother, a daughter, and a wife. And she said, on a scale of 1 to 10, she wrote, I'm a 6+. And then she broke the 4th wall and she said, I hope you think so too. So I was reading her 7 pages in tidbits and brief memories. I realized I had learned way more about her in those tidbits than if she had written a narrative. I learned so much about her from those little tidbits. So I thought, you know what? Maybe I can write a story. I have tidbits. I have little memories. That's all I've got. So here's what my book is so far. I'm an interrupter. My family knows, my friends know, and they've either forgiven me or figured out how to deal with it. I trained and ran for a half marathon, and I got a participation medal for that. And I put it up on the mirror in my bathroom, And then, because I was so proud, and the next day I was diagnosed with cancer, and every day that I had treatment, I would look at that medal and I would say, if I could do that, I can do this. And the big thing for me that came out of that was, you have to do hard things so that you can do hard things. I also wrote about the fact that I'm deathly afraid of heights. Lots of people say they're scared of heights, and they're not. I like to see the mountains from the valley. I don't need to see the valley from the mountains. And I'll say in my book so far, I've also written that I'm still unhappy about a few pounds of extra weight, but now I'm not afraid for that to be part of my story. So the big question for me right now is, what story would Tippy tell if she knew me now?